Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service. It is Tuesday, February 7th, 2023, and we try to do this each evening through a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media. If you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. It'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S. with Hawaii and Alaska to the lower left, and you point and click anywhere on this map and you can get the forecast with any related watches, warnings, or advisories for anywhere in the country. It's a good way to check up on what the weather's doing and friends and families. And looking at areas of the Midwest, high wind watch across Indiana, parts of western Ohio, eastern Illinois. Winter storm watch, northeast Iowa up into southwest Wisconsin, around the Wisconsin Dells, maybe as much as 5 to 9 inches of snow on the way. Flood watch down there across southern parts of Missouri, northern Arkansas, and then back out through the west, a scattering of winter weather advisories, western New Mexico on up into western Montana, Idaho, and also along the Cascades from Oregon on up into the area just east of Bellingham, Washington, a winter storm warning for upwards of a foot of snow at 3,000 feet. But here in Alaska, at least in the far north, winds and bitter cold have relaxed, giving a little break there to the Arctic coast and North Slope that had endured some bitter cold temperatures and wind chills here, especially over the weekend and late last week. There is going to be some lower cloudiness, patchy light snow flurries across areas of the interior that could result in some instrument flight rules flying. So keep that in mind here as we go through tonight and Wednesday. But the most significant weather system will be a frontal system that'll bring in snow and gale force winds Wednesday evening into the day Thursday across the Panhandle, especially southern central areas. There are a couple of watches I'll highlight here in just a moment. But overall, a cold and occasionally wintry weather pattern will continue across much of the state through mid-February. No signs of any significant thaws or milder temperatures on the way. Looking at the webcams from the FAA, up there around Kotzebue and Kotzebue Sound, a little light ice fog, 11 below zero, so there are cold temperatures up there, especially across the Seward Peninsula. And Aniak, further south there and through the southwest interior, picking up a little bit of light snow or flurries, a temperature at 2 above. Colder air will be settling into the lower Yukon Valley and the Kuskokwim River Basin, so expect temperatures there to be below zero coming up next couple of days. And then back up through the northern Gulf Valdez, the snow starting to wind down. There was a period of heavier snow this Tuesday morning, along with some fog, but that's tapering off. Temperatures bumped up to 34 now early this afternoon. And then in the far southern Panhandle, Heidelberg, which is under a high wind watch for Wednesday evening and Wednesday overnight, is getting a little bit of light rain and some sprinkles now at 37, but that stronger frontal band with those winds will be pushing into there tomorrow evening. So right now, the only advisories in the state, I should say watches, there's 2 watches. There is a winter storm watch for Hyder in the southeast interior up against the coastal mountains where 6 or more inches of snow could fall Wednesday night through Thursday. And then here, Prince of Wales Island, especially the southern part of that, including Heidelberg, could see some strong winds Wednesday evening, Wednesday overnight, gusts as high as 50 to 60 miles an hour as this stronger frontal band lifts northward up into the southern and central areas of the Panhandle. The interior central areas of the Panhandle may be looking at 3 to 6 inches of snow, including areas around Petersburg, Algoon, on up through Juneau, any of the central inner channels there. But here on the satellite imagery, we have one area of low pressure spinning there just south end of the Panhandle around Heidelberg. And then back to the west, there is another circulation in the northwestern Gulf. And then further west out here, there's a pretty clear one just west of AKwx, south of Shimia, out there south of the western Aleutians. And then in the far north, the really cold Arctic air, it's relaxed a bit. It's still there, but not as intense as what it was late last week or over the weekend. And there'll be another weather system. Here's the hints of that just beginning to emerge. That'll be lifting northward up into the Gulf, and that's what's going to bring that stronger frontal band along with some heavier precipitation in through the southern and central panhandle Wednesday night and Thursday. So right now, just a collection of weaker lows from areas of the southeast Gulf back to the northwest Gulf. Another weak low up around Kotzebue Sound. Another one, the eastern Aleutians back toward the central Aleutians with a few weaker areas of high pressure. Nothing that impressive for this time of year. Pretty quiet overnight into early on Wednesday morning, but here's the hint of that next low coming out of the North Pacific, so that by Wednesday afternoon, this stronger front will be approaching AKwx and be pushing up into the panhandle later Wednesday night, bringing gale force winds and some moderate to heavier precipitation that could fall in the form of heavier snow around Hyder and some moderate snow up here and through the central inner channels that may require some sort of winter weather advisory. And then off here in the southwest corner, there's another pretty strong low that will be coming out of the North Pacific and riding just south of the central Aleutians on Thursday with central pressure down around 956 millibars. But here, the low that's lifting up, there's kind of a couple of them that are going to swing around. That'll move up into the southeastern Gulf with that frontal band, bringing the precipitation up in through the panhandle here as we go through Thursday. And then back further north, some pockets of flurries and lower clouds extend in the eastern interior and back out toward the northwest. Low temperatures Wednesday morning will be generally near or a bit below freezing in through the panhandle. Overall, temperatures have cooled a bit here across south central too. 0 up there at Glen Allen, but further back to the west, below 0, other side of the Alaska Range. Temperatures Wednesday afternoon could still be up around 40, say at Craig and Ketchikan. And then back to the west, colder temperatures settling in through the Anchorage Bowl, western Kenai, generally below freezing in the mid-20s. And then on Thursday morning, lows will be near freezing or just above that in the far southern panhandle, but depending on where temperatures stay, if it's a little colder, snow mounts could be a little heavier here in the inner channels. Back to the west, sub-zero on the other side of the Alaska Range, 6 below there up to Glen Allen and the Copper River Basin. And daytime highs colder Thursday. I have to struggle to hit 20 Anchorage down through Kenai and Soldotna. Maybe getting back up in the lower 40s here across the southern panhandle as that frontal system with milder air pushes in from off the Pacific. Coldest air is up in the far north. Still some 20s and 30s below come Wednesday morning. Widespread, not quite as cold, but sub-zero temperatures along the Yukon River and across the Seward Peninsula. And daytime highs Wednesday afternoon will stay below 0 along and north of the Yukon River, about 5 above in Fairbanks, 11 there at Nenana, Healy. But as we go into Thursday morning, still some 20s and 30s below along the North Slope and Arctic coast, but not 40s below like we were seeing this past weekend. And overall temperatures, similar trend, near below 0 readings along and north of the Yukon River. And overall, this pattern is not going to change much here as we head into next week and through the middle of the month. The southwest interior will be turning colder up through the lower Yukon River Basin as well as the Kuskokwim River. We expect temperatures to be sub-zero there, even a little below freezing, extending out into the eastern Aleutians. Daytime highs, though, do get back up above freezing. Dutch Harbor on up through the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, but daytime highs 4 below at Bethel, 5 below, Eamonnok and Aniak there, 3, 5 below. So it stays cold with temperatures even maybe a bit colder come Thursday morning, as you're going to keep a northeast flow of colder, drier air coming in across that region. And daytime highs should get back maybe near 40 there at Dutch Harbor come Thursday afternoon, but stay at or below 0 across much of the southwest interior. Let's take a look, though, at what we're expecting here. The Climate Prediction Center of the National Weather Service temperature outlook, 6 to 10 day outlook for February 13th through the 17th. Is indicating a good chance of below normal temperatures across much of the mainland, really the entire state, but centered on Cook Inlet, northwestward up across the southwest interior, surrounding Norton Sound, even Kotzebue Sound. We expect below normal temperatures to prevail through mid-month. So no signs of any appreciable warming or thaws on the way, and precipitation amounts could average above normal across areas of the east along the Alcan border in through the Panhandle. Further west, a little below normal in the northwest from Nome through Kotzebue and Utqiagvik, and then near normal across much of the southwest and the remainder of the mainland extending out across the Alaska Peninsula.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
It's now time for your aviation weather, and if you have a flight planned this midweek, either on Wednesday or Thursday, the main weather feature will be an area of low pressure lifting out of the North Pacific up into the southeastern Gulf with a strong frontal band working its way across the Panhandle with at least gale force winds. That'll create areas of turbulence and low-level wind shear, as well as some accumulating snow and areas of the interior along the Yukon River, especially along north of the Alaska Range. We expect widespread IFR conditions on Wednesday morning, extending in through the intercoastal mountains, inner channels there of the Panhandle. By Wednesday afternoon, that area should shrink back a bit. Generally MVFR across the Panhandle, except for some IFR in the far north around Chilkoot and White Pass. And then back up here north of the Yukon River, south side of the central Brooks Range, we expect some IFR that expands again Wednesday night, Thursday morning along the south side of the Brooks Range up through the Yukon Flats into the Alcan border, and then we will be watching a widespread area of IFR conditions overspread the Panhandle late Wednesday night and Thursday associated with that active frontal band, and then during the day on Thursday, rather widespread IFR conditions across much of the Panhandle. Also showing up then an area of extensive IFR lower Bering Sea across the central and eastern Aleutians associated with a rather strong area of low pressure coming up there out of the North Pacific. But pass conditions on Wednesday, Anaktuvik Pass should generally be MVFR throughout the pass, but once you get to the south entrance, there southward through the Yukon River, IFR. Same thing at Adigan Pass, generally MVFR along the pass and to the north, but the south entrance and down through the Yukon River, IFR conditions rather extensive. For Lake Clark and Merrill, west arm of the Alaska Range, MVFR conditions will give way to VFR by later morning or certainly afternoon. Rainy Pass, same thing, MVFR becoming VFR. Windy Pass, IFR conditions will give way to MVFR, as will be the case at Isabel Pass, a little further east, IFR to MVFR. And then Mentasta Pass should generally see MVFR conditions during the day on Wednesday. Further southwest, Tanita Pass, IFR to start out Wednesday morning, but then MVFR. And Portage Pass will see IFR conditions, especially through the eastern half in the morning, giving way to MVFR conditions. And then finally, in the far northern Panhandle at Chilkoot and White, we expect IFR conditions to prevail on Wednesday. Freezing levels at surface run out through the lower Bering Sea across the tip of the Alaska Peninsula to just off the Kodiak Island coast, as well as up through the northern Gulf Coast and then extending inland to the inner channels of the central southern Panhandle. Freezing levels aloft don't get above 2,000 feet until well southwest there of Haida Gwaii and Vancouver Island. Otherwise, the air mass overall is rather cold across the state of Alaska. Greatest threat for icing on Wednesday will be associated with low pressure lifting out of the North Pacific and a strong frontal band with some heavier precipitation along and ahead of that. Above 6,000 feet, there'll be still some pockets of isolated icing along areas of the northern, northwestern Gulf Coast above 3,000 feet, and then also area of some isolated moderate icing out over the central Aleutians above 2,000 feet. The strongest winds aloft at 30,000 feet jet stream level. We have a jet core, kind of anticyclonic coming around a ridge, upwards of 125 knots from the southwest, well off of the Panhandle and British Columbia coast. And then behind me, pretty good jet max, upwards of 145 knots from the central Aleutians, dipping down into the North Pacific. And then as we look at 9,000 feet or 700 millibars, nothing too impressive out to the west. A little bit of wind, 40 knots coming in there toward the YK Delta, but more importantly, associated with the stronger low lifting out of the North Pacific, a broader band of 45 to as high as 75 knot winds from the southwest. And then down to 3,000 feet, we see that low pressure circulation Wednesday and a frontal band coming up from the south will push into Haida Gwaii later in the day. Winds could be upwards of 60, 65 knots. That's going to create areas of low-level wind shear along with quite a bit of turbulence in the vicinity of that active frontal zone, surface to 6,000 feet, and that will overspread the panhandle later Wednesday night and on Thursday. Meanwhile, Wednesday afternoon, back toward the west, some pockets of moderate turbulence around Kodiak Island, the entrance of Cook Inlet, Bristol Bay, and then also back toward the central and western Aleutians, the surface to 3,000 feet. So that wraps up your flight weather. If you do have a flight plan, check the latest conditions and forecasts.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and joining me once again is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Eric, welcome back to the program.
Hey, I'm glad to be here.
And once again, you brought some wonderful satellite pictures to show us and do a little show and tell about. It's just amazing. I can get lost in satellite pictures all day. What did you bring today?
Right. Well, weather satellites, what are they good for? Yeah. Of course, there's the pretty pictures that they bring us. You know, we've got a picture here from April of 2012. Okay. The Sumi NPP satellite, it's what they call a polar orbiter, which means it covers Alaska because we're near the pole. Beautiful image. You can see a storm off of southeast Alaska, the sea ice along the Bering Sea up into the Arctic. A really nice picture, and this is important because it allows a forecaster to see where the storms are, where the ice is, where the clear areas are. You need to know where the weather is now if you're going to forecast it into the future. Exactly. So satellites give us these good pictures. This is called surveillance of the weather. And you know, that same satellite also has another picture from a little more recently, August of 2014, Tropical Storm Iselle bearing down on the Hawaiian Islands. Hawaii doesn't get hit by a whole lot of tropical storms or hurricanes. Sometimes it does. And here's a picture from the same satellite, the Sumi NPP Polar Orbiter. It shows Tropical Storm Iselle approaching the Hawaiian Islands from the southeast. You can see the storm swirling away there, and then there's the Hawaiian Islands. This is a tropical storm, not quite as strong as a hurricane because we don't see the eye wall in there. This is still a serious weather system. And all of this information comes just from that satellite picture. It's so much information, and it's wonderful to look at. You see the beauty and the awe of nature right there depicted in that weather satellite. We call it a polar orbiter because the satellite flies high over the globe. Maybe we could look here at we happen to bring the planet Earth with us. This is our satellite. A polar orbit flies really close to the Earth, maybe 800 kilometers over the Earth, and goes up over the pole and then back down, and then the Earth spins under the satellite as it goes by. That's in contrast to the geostationary birds, which are much further out. And they don't view Alaska quite as well. So we love those polar orbiter satellites here in Alaska.
So when we're a lot closer, we get much better details and imagery and an idea of a better maybe position of what's going on when it's passing right over Alaska or right over Hawaii.
Yes, exactly right. The polar orbiter gives such a good view of places like Alaska. And because it's close to the planet, there's another aspect of satellites in the polar orbit that is helpful for weather forecasting. It's an aspect that's maybe not as immediately obvious as the pretty pictures that we see. And that is the capacity for the satellite to produce what's called a sounding. That is finding the vertical profile of temperature and moisture in the atmosphere. We've all heard of weather balloons. Weather balloons are launched here in Alaska twice a day at a number of airports, everywhere from Barrow to St. Paul Island to Kodiak, Anchorage and Fairbanks, Yakutat, a number of places. Launch these balloons, and we've got a picture of a balloon being launched at an airport, and the balloon goes up. It's pulling a little package, an instrument package with it that reports temperature, pressure, humidity data back, and we use that information to help feed what are called numerical weather prediction models.
The models.
The models, right. It's a mouthful, so we just call it the models. And these computer simulations, these models are computer programs that simulate the motion of the atmosphere. Well, how does a model know what the future will be like? You have to tell the model what things are like now. And you give it all kinds of information, including information from these satellite sounders. Very important. Just how important are they? We have a recent, comparatively recent study that really brings home, and this is Superstorm Sandy. We have a track image here of the track of Hurricane Sandy. It was down in the Caribbean around Cuba, and then it moved north over the ocean, offshore of the eastern seaboard, and then at the last minute, Sandy made what's called the left hook. It turned hard to the left and slammed into New Jersey. Was a major problem for the the mid-Atlantic states a calamity. It fused with another weather system and became known, this is not an official title, but Superstorm Sandy.
Right.
It was quite the weather event. Well, the modelers, after the event, there's a group of modelers in Europe. They have a very good model, a frustratingly good model if you're the Americans trying to pursue their excellence. They reran their model afterwards in what's called a data denial study, where they kept everything the same. So this is 6 months after Sandy, but they went back, they reran the same model, they fed the model the same initial conditions, that is telling the model, okay, here's where we think Sandy is, down near Cuba in the Caribbean. Everything was the same as it was in the real forecast, except they didn't let the model know.
No satellite data.
No satellite data. So we're going to put that over here, no satellite data for you. The resulting forecast 5 days out, back when the real Sandy was happening and the model had the satellite data, the forecast was pretty good. We've got a graphic here on the left side. We show the forecast of where Sandy would be, and that's the red bullseye on the left. It's just south of where it actually wound up hitting. Not a bad forecast from this computer simulation, 120 hours out. On the right, you see the same model, but it didn't have the satellite data to help it understand things. And the storm is way offshore. It misses. The forecast is more accurate when the model has the satellite data. So that's the idea today we want to convey, is weather satellites. They're important because they show us the pictures of where storms are. We see good examples of this. Yeah, the surveillance right now, it's great to look at those pictures. And in addition, behind the scenes, maybe not immediately obvious, but the models have to have that satellite data for them to be good forecasts. And then a meteorologist uses that information to help everyone with the forecast of where the storms will be in the future.
That is fascinating information that we can look at, see where things have been, because you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. That's that old adage there. But seeing that satellites are actually helping us move forward in the weather information system is pretty amazing stuff.
You bet.
And if you want to check out Eric's satellite images that he's been talking about, whether that's something from today or last week or even much further back in Alaska history, you can easily do that yourself. Go to www.gina.alaska.edu and you can find those images there. Eric, thanks so much for joining us once again. And again, we will join you hopefully again soon for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, where you'll tell us more really cool information about the satellites over our heads in Alaska. Thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and it's now time to look at the sea ice edge before we get into the marine weather forecast. The ice is extensive throughout the north along the Arctic coast in through the Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait. There are some Plinias openings in the ice there west of AKwx, as well as on the east side of Norton Sound and along the far eastern Russian coast there through the Bering Strait. Further south and west, the ice has had a tendency to redevelop across Bristol and Kuskokwim bays, and I would anticipate with colder air coming in across the southwest interior, we'll see the ice growth extend further southward. And there still is somewhat of a northerly component to the wind that'll help maybe push the ice a little further south here through the early portion of this week. But at least looking at the winds here across the southwest during the day on Wednesday, winds will be out of the southeast to south, 10-15 knots inner channels. Picking up here down toward Craig to 30 knots from the southwest. We will see stronger 45-knot gales arrive here in the southern portion of the Panhandle surrounding Prince of Wales Island by Wednesday night. That's when some of the strongest winds will move through. And then in the wake of that, Thursday, we expect precipitation to push up into the central areas of the inner channels. That'll be in the form of accumulating snows. Some winds as high as 35 knots here down toward Dixon Entrance with waves of 14 feet. Winds easterly between Sitka and Gustavus, 35-knot gales. Waves out over the open waters of the Gulf as high as 17, 18 feet south of Gustavus, and then more of a northeast to north wind there off of Yakutat and the northeastern portion of the Gulf. For the northwestern Gulf, including Cook Inlet, winds the lower half of Cook Inlet will be out of the west 15 to 20 knots, waves 3 to 5 feet there down through lower Cook Inlet. East winds, though, there's still a weak low pressure circulation off the Kenai coast. East winds 15 knots, Prince William Sound, 3-foot waves, but westerly winds off of say the southern portion of the Kenai Peninsula at 25 knots, waves 10 feet. And then across a broad area of the region, by the time we get to Thursday, winds will generally be out of the north-northwest 20-25 knots out over the northwestern Gulf, waves 5 to 8 feet. Northwesterly 15 knots, 3-foot waves in Prince William Sound. North to northwest winds 15 to 20 knots through middle and lower Cook Inlet there through the mouth at waves of 3 to 4 feet. Winds are going to be a little more variable in the vicinity of Kodiak Island and down on the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, 10 to 15 knots, waves 6-7 feet in the open waters. Look for variable or easterly winds from Bristol Bay down through north of Cold Bay with waves of 2 to 4 feet. And then by the time we get into Thursday, winds will be north-northwest 15 knots Kodiak Island, but turning back around southeast to northeast there in the lower portion of the Alaska Peninsula to 35-knot gales, 10-foot waves south of Sand Point, 6-foot waves there north of Cold Bay. And then on Wednesday, winds across the Aleutian chain, relatively light, especially eastern Aleutians, 10 to 15 knots, generally with some sort of easterly component. But more importantly, by the time we get into Thursday, a stronger, deeper low down around 955 millibars is going to create 50-knot storm force winds from the east-southeast, 40 to 45 knot east-southeast gales toward the eastern Aleutians with waves 17 feet on the North Pacific side and 12 to as high as 20 feet there north of Atka, away from the protection of the islands. Now on Wednesday, winds, there is a weak circulation here out over south of Nunavik Island. Ice growth will continue along here, the ice edge, as colder temperatures come in from off of the mainland. But otherwise nothing too exciting wind-wise, and the winds will develop a bit more of a north-northeasterly component off the ice come Thursday, so the ice will likely drift further southward, the edge of it at least there from Kuskokwim Bay out toward south of St. Matthew. Look for 40-knot easterly gales at St. Paul with 10-foot waves. And then finally in the far north, lighter winds 5 to 10 knots across the Arctic coast, 10 to 15-knot northeast to north winds through the Bering Strait with the ice in place. And then on Thursday, easterly winds at about 10 knots from Kaktovik down through Point Lay, turning northeast to north through the Bering Strait to 15 knots on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. And by Wednesday afternoon, here comes a stronger low and stronger frontal system that'll be working its way northward up into the Panhandle with those gale force winds and potential for accumulating snows, especially at Hyder and on up in through the central inner channels. And then during the day Thursday, we look for additional precipitation and gusty winds there throughout the Panhandle.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.